alles hat.
Let us open with prayer.
Lasst uns mit Gebet beginnen.
Dear Father in heaven,
Lieber Vater im Himmel,
Lord, we thank you that we can again open the Book of Esther,
ja, wir danken dir, dass wir wieder das Buch Esther auftun können,
that we can continue the study.
dass wir dieses Studium fortsetzen können.
Lord, we thank you for all your blessings thus far in our lives,
Ja, wir danken dir für alle Segnungen soweit in unserem Leben,
especially the understandings of your word.
insbesondere die Verständnisse über dein Wort.
Please, Father, open our hearts that the seed can fall into good ground.
So, bitte, Vater, hilft uns, unseren Herzen zu öffnen, sodass der Same ins gute Boden fallen kann.
And that each one of us would bring forth fruit,
Dass ein jeder von uns Frucht hervorbringen würde.
and that you would help us to wait upon you,
Dass du uns helfen mögest, dass wir auf dich warten.
and that we would learn to walk by faith and not by sight.
Und dass wir lernen würden, durch Glaube zu wandeln und nicht durch Sicht.
And you promised, Father, that you will have a people,
Und du hast es verheißen, Vater, dass du ein Volk haben würdest.
and these your people are illustrated in those faithful characters in the Book of Esther.
Und dein Volk sind dargestellt durch diese treue Charakter im Buch Esther.
Help each one of us to have a desire to be part of this illustration one day,
Und hilft ein jeder von uns ein Verlangen, ein Teil von dieser Darstellung eines Tages sein zu werden.
and also already today that we would realize when we walk through these illustration and principle,
Und auch sogar heute noch, als wir durch diese Darstellungen hindurchwandeln ins Prinzip.
and that we would realize the great work that you are doing here on earth.
Und dass wir wahrnehmen würden, das große Werk, die du hier auf der Erde tust.
And we ask and pray all these things in Jesus' name.
Und wir bitten und beten all diese Dinge in Jesu Namen.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so let us now turn back to the Book of Esther.
So, lasst uns jetzt zum Buch Esther zurückgehen.
And yesterday we looked especially at chapter 4, but also the beginning verses of chapter 5.
Und gestern haben wir Kapitel 4 angeschaut und das Anfang von Kapitel 5.
And this is where we want to continue.
Und da wollen wir weitermachen.
So let us go back to Esther chapter 4.
So gehen wir zurück zu Esther Kapitel 4.
Just to remind us shortly.
Nur um eine kurze Erinnerung.
And just, I want to mention it, whenever we make like a study on a certain book, let's say,
Ich möchte es nur erwähnt haben, dass wenn immer wir ein Studium über eines gewissen Buches machen,
and then it would always be wise to just read these passages in your own time, also the chapters that already come beforehand.
und dann ist es immer eine gute Idee, zuvor also diese Kapitel durchzulesen, selber im eigenen Zeit, besonders die Kapitel, die noch kommen.
Then it's always fresh in the mind. When you come to the class, it's always it's much easier to find your place. Okay.
Dann ist es immer frisch im Gedächtnis, wenn wir zur Klasse kommen, zu der Klasse kommen, dann ist es immer frisch im Gedächtnis.
Okay. So, and it's easier then to find your place.
Und es ist einfacher, deinen Platz zu finden.
Okay. Good. So now let us go to Esther chapter 4.
So gehen wir zu Esther 4.
And there we saw basically this illustration beginning basically in verse 1 that Mordecai, he saw the sign, he saw the death decree.
Und da haben wir diese Darstellung gesehen, in Vers 1 an im Grunde. Mordecai hat den Zeichen gesehen, diesen Todesdekret.
He therefore clearly understood the work that he was to do now and also all the other Jews, right?
Und deswegen hat er auch klar verstanden, welchen Werk er und all die anderen Juden jetzt tun mussten.
It was now the work of afflicting your soul in the time of affliction, right?
Das war die Seele zu peinigen zur Zeit des Drangsals.
Therefore you put on sackcloth and ashes, and all the other Jews were weeping and fasting and wailing.
Deswegen tun sie Sacktuch und Asche an und all die Juden, die anderen Juden, haben geheult und geklagt.
And Esther, at the beginning, she didn't recognize the sign, right?
Und Esther am Anfang hat den Zeichen nicht erkannt.
But Mordecai then told her,
Aber Mordecai hat sie erklärt.
and he basically told her now, you must go before the king.
Dann hat sie gesagt, dass du jetzt vor den König treten musst.
And she was hesitating, okay,
Und sie war zögerlich,
because she said, I haven't been called for these 30 days, and if I just would appear before the king like this, he would put me to death.
und sie hat gesagt, diese 30 Tage lang bin ich nicht gerufen worden und wenn ich jetzt einfach vor dem König erscheinen würde, werde ich möglich umgebracht werden.
And these 30 days we connected with these 30 days from Daniel chapter 6, right, the Sunday law.
Diese 30 Tage haben wir diese 30 Tage von Daniel 6 verbunden vom Sonntagsgesetz.
Okay, so she was looking back here and she was basically saying, alright, because Mordecai told her then, you have been called for such a time as this. Right?
Sie schaute zurück und Mordecai hat sie erklärt, du bist für solch eine Zeit wie dies gerufen worden.
And we saw Christ also said, for this reason I came, or for this hour I came into the world. Right?
Wir haben auch gelesen, dass Christus sagte, auch gerade für diese Stunde bin ich in der Welt gekommen.
Okay, it's not a time where you must lay down your life.
Es ist eine Zeit, wo du dein Leben aufs Linie setzen musst oder niederlegen musst.
Where you basically must be willing to sacrifice your life and let God decide whether you will continue to live or whether you will die as a martyr. Right?
Du bereit bist, dein Leben niederzulegen und Gott die Entscheidung zu überlassen, ob du nun als Märtyrer sterben wirst oder weiterleben wirst.
And yes, Sister Manuela, remember yesterday in her prayer she was a little bit terrified of this thought. Okay.
Schwester Manuela, gestern habe ich wahrgenommen in ihrem Gebet, dass sie davon dieser Gedanke erschrocken war.
And she mentioned we should be reminded that we don't, in this time period when we really have to lay down our lives, it's not that we're in the condition that we're in now, right? So we will not be in the condition that we are in now. Right here, when we are called to lay down our lives.
Also wenn wir gerufen werden, in dieser Zeit, im Sonntagsgesetzkrise tatsächlich unser Leben niederzulegen, wir werden in einem anderen Zustand sein, als dass wir jetzt sind.
And so now we are not born again, right?
So jetzt sind wir noch nicht neugeboren.
And we're terrified of this thought. Okay?
Und dieser Gedanke erschreckt uns.
Or maybe not, maybe we're careless and indifferent and not really thinking of it. Okay.
Oder vielleicht nicht. Vielleicht sind wir sorglos und gleichgültig und denken nicht darüber nach.
But if we would really be confronted, we would be terrified. But once God's Spirit is in us, then we can bear it.
Aber wenn wir wahrlich damit konfrontiert werden, werden wir erschrocken. Hätten wir aber Gottes Geist in uns, dann hätten wir es ertragen können.
Okay, so but the point is, this is what we are called for. One day we will literally face death.
Aber
Okay.
dafür sind wir gerufen. Eines Tages werden wir tatsächlich dem Tod gegenüberstehen.
Okay, good. So, and leading up to this, the Lord leads us through these small trials in order to fit us up for the greater trials.
Und daraufhin führend, der Herr gibt uns diese kleinere Versuchungen in Vorbereitung auf diese große Prüfung.
Okay, so and Esther said, okay, I will go,
Und Esther sagte, ja, ich werde gehen,
but I need time.
aber
Right?
ich brauche Zeit.
Okay, so and this was the same time that Daniel here asked for. Okay,
Das ist derselbe, wie Daniel hier nach Zeit gefragt hatte.
and this time was illustrated by 3 days fasting and praying. Right?
Diese Zeit wurde dargestellt durch 3 Tage von Fasten und Beten.
Okay, and at the end then she appeared before the king.
Und am
Okay.
Ende erschien sie vor dem König.
Okay, and the king held out the golden scepter,
Der König hat der goldene Zepter herausgestreckt zu sie.
and she was accepted. Right?
Sie wurde angenommen.
Okay, and then that's already now chapter 5.
Und das ist jetzt Kapitel 5.
So let us just remind ourselves. Let us begin in chapter 5, verse 1.
Erinnern wir uns, Kapitel 5, Vers 1.
It says, Now it came to pass on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther? And what is thy request? It shall be even given thee to the half of the kingdom. Right, so he now offers the half kingdom.
So bietet jetzt die Hälfte des Königreichs an.
And we looked at it, that was basically when Christ offers you to sit on the throne with him, right? Share the throne.
Wir haben das angeschaut, das ist, wo Christus dir anbietet, mit ihm auf den Thron zu teilen.
Okay. And Esther now asks here in verse 4.
Und Esther stellt die Frage hier in Vers 4.
And Esther answered, If it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, Cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther hath said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine. So what kind of banquet is it?
Vers 6. Was für ein Fest ist das?
Banquet of wine.
Fest des Weines.
What is thy petition, and it shall be granted thee, and what is thy request, even to the half of the kingdom, it shall be performed. Okay, so he just repeats it here. I don't know exactly why he does so, but it seems like, I don't know, a doubling. Okay.
Vers 6, wiederholt dieselbe Aussage hier. Ich weiß nicht genau ich weiß nicht genau warum, aber mir scheint es, wenn es eine Verdopplung sei.
Okay, so
Which verse is it?
Vers 6.
verse 6, right? It's the same as verse 3 where he offers the half kingdom second time. Okay. Okay, so but let us look at this banquet of wine.
Aber lass uns diese Bankett oder Fest des Weines anschauen.
So right here, when she stood before the king, now she invites the king and Haman to the banquet, right?
Genau hier, wo sie vor dem König steht, sie lädt den König und Haman zum Fest ein.
Okay, let us go now to John chapter 2.
Lass uns jetzt zu Johannes Kapitel 2 gehen.
John chapter 2,
Johannes 2.
and let us begin in verse 1.
Fangen wir in Vers 1 an.
It says, And the third day there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Which day was it?
So, welcher Tag war das?
Third day.
Der
Right?
dritte Tag.
It was also here on the third day that she now stood before the king.
Und
Right?
auch hier der dritte Tag, wo sie vor dem König stand.
Okay, and invited them to a banquet of wine.
Sie
Yes?
zu dem Fest des Weines einlud.
Verse 2.
Vers 2.
And both Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage. So what is it?
So, was ist das jetzt? Vers 2.
Called to the feast.
Yes, it's the marriage, right? It's like Matthew 22.
Das
Right?
ist der Hochzeitsmahl, wie Matthäus 22.
Yeah, so they were invited to the marriage.
Sie wurden
Okay.
zum Hochzeit eingeladen.
Here are represented those that come. Okay.
Hier steht es diejenigen, die kommen.
Okay, verse 3.
Vers 3.
And when they wanted wine, the mother of Jesus saith unto him, They have no wine. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come. His mother saith unto the servants, Whatsoever he saith unto you, do it. And there were set there 6 water pots of stone, after the manner of the purifying of the Jews, containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece. So, Jesus' mother says, Whatsoever he saith, do, right?
So Jesu Mutter sagte, was auch immer er sage, das tu.
So therefore, what is Jesus?
So, was ist Jesus?
Or who is he, or what office does he have?
Und welches Amt hat er?
Yeah, he's an instructor, right?
Ist ein Unterweiser.
He's a teacher.
Er ist
Okay.
ein Lehrer.
He's whatever he says, you should do.
Das, was auch immer er sage, das sollst du tun.
So what does he say? Verse 7.
Was sagt es? Vers 7.
Jesus saith unto them, Fill the water pots with water. And they filled them up to the brim. Okay, so how many water pots were there?
So, wie viele Wasserkrüge gab es?
6, right?
6.
And they are of stone.
Und die sind aus Stein.
Okay, so what would they represent?
Was würden die denn darstellen?
6 is the number of?
6 ist der Zahl
Yes, the number of man, right?
des Menschen.
And what does Paul speak about these vessels?
Und worüber spricht Paulus mit diesen Gefäßen?
Where does it say it again? I think Ephesians.
Where are you putting this?
I just take the principle of it. I just want to show that here's now where you get filled with the Holy Spirit, and then you give the wine to the governor. Right.
Yes, I know, but this third day here, for instance, this is what I'm a bit, because you're sort of paralleling this with the feast that she's talking about, and this third day is prior to that waymark.
Where?
The one where you've got sackcloth there, right there, number 3, that's where they come up. Right, the third day, and they're going to get filled with the Spirit, and once they're filled with the Spirit, now they're going to give the wine.
Yes.
Okay, now, just make sure, because you, okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so let us go now to the vessels. 2 Corinthians, chapter 4, verse 7.
2. Korinther, Vers 4, Kapitel 4 und Vers 7. 2. Korinther 4, 7.
It says here, but we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellency of the power may be of God and not of us. So what does Paul call us?
Vers 7. Was nennt Paulus uns?
Earthen vessels. Right?
Irdische Gefäße,
Yes.
diese
Okay.
Wasserkrüge.
So let us go back to John chapter 2.
Dann gehen wir zurück zu Johannes 2.
Because these water pots, they get now filled with water, right?
Diese Wasserkrüge werden mit Wasser gefüllt.
And according to verse 7, how are they filled?
Und gemäß Vers 7, wie werden sie gefüllt?
Yeah, to the brim, right?
Ganz oben drauf.
So therefore, what kind of filling is this?
Deswegen, was für eine Füllung ist das?
Yeah, it's a full out pouring, right?
Volle Ausgießung.
It's full as it can get, right?
So voll wie es sein kann.
So the whole temple now gets filled with the glory, right?
Der ganze Tempel wird mit der Herrlichkeit gefüllt.
So therefore, what is it?
So deswegen, was ist es?
The latter rain.
Spätling.
So then once you're filled with the latter rain, right?
Nachdem du mit dem Spätregen gefüllt bist,
What happens then?
was geschieht dann?
Verse 8.
Vers 8.
And he saith unto them, draw out now and bear unto the governor of the feast, and they bear it. So now it is given to the governor, right?
So, jetzt wird es dem Gouverneur gereicht.
When the ruler of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and knew not whence it was, but the servants which drew the water knew, the governor of the feast called the bridegroom, and saith unto him, every man at the beginning doth set forth good wine, and when men have well drunk, then that which is worse. But thou hast kept the good wine until now. Okay, so who's now calling for who?
So, wem ruft wer?
The ruler and the governor, they now call for the bridegroom.
Der Regierende und der Gouverneure, die rufen nach der Bräutigam.
And the bridegroom is
Der Bräutigam ist wer?
Christ, right?
Christus.
So as soon as these governors and rulers taste the wine, they now have a desire for Christ, right?
Sobald dass diese Gouverneure und Regierende das Wein kosten, sie haben ein Verlangen nach Christus.
Yes?
Amen.
Okay. So, and therefore, when Esther is now here at the banquet of wine,
So deswegen, wenn Esther hier bei dem Fest des Weines ist,
she would now illustrate somebody giving out the wine, right, to the king and to Haman. Okay.
sie werde denn jemand darstellen, die das Wein der König und Haman reicht.
Okay. So, but we know Haman, he doesn't have the desire for the bridegroom.
Wir
Okay.
wissen aber, dass Haman hat kein Verlangen nach dem Bräutigam.
So he drinks the wine, but he doesn't basically receive it.
Er
Right?
trinkt das Wein, nimmt es aber nicht an.
Okay, so let us go now back to Esther chapter 5.
So gehen wir jetzt zurück zu Esther 5.
And let us continue verse 7.
Lesen wir weiter in Vers 7.
Because the king at the banquet of wine now asked, "What is thy petition?"
Und der König zum Weinfest fragt, was willst du? Was bittest du?
It says, "Then answered Esther and said, My petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet, that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king hath said." So what is she now requesting?
So, wonach bittet sie?
The second one.
Yeah, will be a second banquet, right?
Ein zweites Fest geben wird.
But this second banquet is to be when?
Aber diese zweite Banquet sollte wann denn? Wann sein?
Yeah, on the next day.
Am
Right?
nächsten Tag.
Okay, so I already put it here. Okay,
Ich habe das bereits hier markiert.
no, I will put it here.
Ich werde es hier markieren.
And I want to show you why.
Ich würde zeigen, warum.
Okay, let's just now continue in verse 9. Okay,
Lass uns weiterlesen, Vers 9.
it says, "Then went Haman forth that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up, nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai." So he came now from the banquet of wine and he was joyous. Yes?
So, kam von diesem Weinfest und war froh.
But now, when he saw Mordecai, he was filled with indignation.
Aber als jetzt Mordecai sieht, dann ist voller Zorn.
Okay. Let's continue verse 10.
Vers 10.
And maybe just we can look at this principle shortly. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 10.
So, um ein Prinzip anzuschauen, gehen wir zuerst zu Jesaja 10.
Verse 5.
Vers 5.
Because Haman was full of indignation, yes?
Denn Haman war voller Zorn.
And who is Haman
Und wer
representing?
stellt Haman da?
Yeah, he's the civil power, but he's the northern power, right?
Das ist die Stadtmacht, der Nordmacht.
How many sons does he have?
Wie viele Söhne hat er?
10.
10.
Right? And we'll see, shouldn't see, he's also married to Zeresh, right?
Wir werden bald sehen, er ist auch mit Zeresh verheiratet.
Okay, so and he had indignation against Mordecai.
Und er hat Zorn gegen Mordecai.
So verse 5.
Vers 5.
O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger and the staff in the hand is mine indignation, right? So the northern power is always the indignation against God's people.
So,
Okay.
der Nordmacht ist immer der Zorn gegen Gottes Volk.
Okay, now let us go back to Esther chapter 5.
Gehen wir zurück zu Esther Kapitel 5.
Then verse 10.
Vers 10.
It says, "Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself, and when he came home, he sent and called for his friends, and Zeresh his wife." So here we see Zeresh.
Hier können wir Zeresh erwähnt sehen.
And Haman told them of the glory of his riches, and the multitude of his children, and all the things wherein the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and servants of the king. So what is Haman doing here?
Was tut Haman hier?
Sorry?
I don't know in English, apart.
Yeah, he's boasting.
Yes,
Yes.
okay.
Er prahlt.
Just keep your finger here. Let's go to Proverbs 16
Halte den Platz hier und geht zum Sprüche 16
and then verse 18.
und Vers 18.
Okay. Everybody there?
Jeder da?
It says, pride goeth before destruction, and an haughty spirit before a fall. Yes? So he's now boasting and lifting himself up, and therefore he's now sure to fall. Okay?
Er prahlt und er hebt sich und deswegen ist er gewiss, dass er fallen wird.
And it says, whosoever exalteth himself shall be
Also wer sich
abased.
erhöht,
Right?
der wird erniedrigt werden.
Let's go back to Esther 5.
Zu Esther 5.
And then verse 12.
Vers 12.
It says, Haman said, moreover, yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared but myself. And tomorrow am I invited unto her also with the king. Yet all this availeth me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then said Zeresh his wife and all his friends unto him, Let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak thou unto the king, that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. Then go thou in merrily with the king unto the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. Okay, so what do we see here?
Was können wir hier sehen?
It's like Zeresh says, kill him, right?
Zeresh sagt, tötet ihn.
Okay, and we know here they make a death decree, but they will execute it then always here at the end, right?
Also wir wissen, dass sie am Anfang der 6. Plage ein Todesdekret machen, führen es aber zur Ende aus.
But we can see here now the same illustrated in this 7th plague, right?
Und wir können dasselbe hier in der 7. Plage dargestellt sehen.
Zeresh is here now and says, kill him tomorrow, right?
Zeresh steht hier und sagt, tötet ihn morgen.
Okay, and he's to go in before the king to inquire, to put him to death just before he goes to the second banquet,
Er
right?
sollte hineingehen zur König, um danach zu verlangen, dass er getötet wird, kurz bevor er zu diesem zweiten Weinfest hineingeht.
Yes.
Amen.
Good. Now let us continue in chapter 6.
Lesen wir weiter jetzt in Kapitel 6.
So now it speaks here the night between where Zeresh says, go in before the king tomorrow, and the point where he then actually goes before the king, right? So that's now these verses here.
So, diesen Versen sind in der Nacht zwischen, wo seine Frau Zeresh sagt, tötet, also baut den Galgen, und der Tag, wo er tatsächlich vor dem König gehen soll.
Yeah, so basically Zeresh says here tomorrow, that would be here, go to the king, right?
Zeresh sagt hier morgen, und da am Ende wäre, wo er vor dem König geht.
So in between is now basically this story here in chapter 6 verse 1.
Und dazwischen ist diese Geschichte hier in Kapitel 6, Vers 1.
Where it says, on that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of records of the chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the king said, what honor and dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this? Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, there's nothing done for him. Okay, so what is the king now doing here?
Bis Vers 3. Also was tut der König hier?
He's looking at these books, right?
Er schaut diese Bücher an.
Okay, So, and he's remembering the good deeds of Mordecai, right?
Und er gedenkt die guten Taten Mordekais.
And the Mordecai's good deed was right here, yes?
Der gute Tat von Mordecai, das war hier.
So he's basically remembering the beginning again.
Er gedenkt das Anfang wieder.
So let us go now to Revelation chapter 5.
Gehen wir jetzt zu Offenbarung
Chapter 4.
Offenbarung Kapitel 4.
Let us begin in verse 1.
Fangen wir in Vers 1 an.
It says, "After this I looked, and behold, a door was opened in heaven. And the first voice which I heard was as it were of a trumpet talking with me, which said, Come up hither, and I will show thee things which must be hereafter." So, where would we be on the line?
So, wo werden wir auf der Linie sein? Vers 1.
6.
Beginning of the seventh.
Also,
Right?
sorry,
Yeah.
yes.
Am Beginn der 7. Plage.
So, where also the two witnesses are called up hither, right?
Auch da, wo die 2 Zeugen hier heraufgerufen werden.
Okay. And then, and he gets shown things which must be hereafter, right?
Er werde Sachen gezeigt, die noch geschehen werden.
Then verse 2.
Vers 2.
"And immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat on the throne. And he that was to look upon like a jasper and a sardine stone, and there was a rainbow round about the throne in sight like unto an emerald, and round about the throne were 24 seats. And upon the seats I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed with white raiment, and they had on their heads crowns of gold." So, what is he seeing, you know?
So, was sieht er hier jetzt?
Yeah, he sees the throne room, right?
Er sieht den Thronsaal,
It's now where the judgment is sitting, okay?
da wo das Gericht stattfindet.
Okay, so in this sense, we have now as the Day of Atonement begins here for this group, so the Day of Atonement begins here.
So wie der Versöhnungstag fängt am 6. Plage an, für diese nächste Gruppe fängt es hier am 7. Plage an.
So let us go to Revelation 8.
Gehen wir jetzt zur Offenbarung 8.
Beginning in verse 1.
Fangen wir in Vers 1 an.
It says, "And when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour." Right? So, seventh seal,
7. Siegel
it's opened here, right?
wird hier geöffnet.
Half an hour.
Eine halbe Stunde.
Half an hour was here for them, and half an hour here for them, right?
Eine halbe Stunde für sie zuvor und eine halbe Stunde jetzt für sie.
Hour of his judgment.
Der Stunde seines Gerichts.
And then it says in verse 2,
Dann sagt es in Vers 2.
"And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne." So what is Christ doing here?
So, was tut Christus hier?
He's interceding, right?
Er tut Fürbittedienst.
Okay. So therefore, in this sense, now this work of the Day of Atonement is going on for this group.
In diesem Sinne, das Werk der Versöhnungstags geht voran für diese Gruppe.
Okay, and also the king is now remembering his past experience, right?
Und auch der König gedenkt seine vergangene Erfahrung jetzt.
So basically, he's remembering the good deeds of the Jews, God's people here.
Er gedenkt die guten Taten von den Juden, von Gottes Volk hier.
And Mordecai.
Mordecai.
He remembers basically how he lifted up Mordecai here in the second place, okay?
Er erinnert sich, wie er Mordecai zum 2. Platz hier erhöht hat,
Because he was drinking this wine of Esther. Okay.
weil er diesen Wein von Esther getrunken hat.
Okay, now let us go back to Esther chapter 6.
Jetzt Esther Kapitel 6 wieder.
And we saw, Chamberlain said, nothing good was done for Mordecai for this.
Und wir haben gelesen, dass der Kämmerer sagt, nichts Gutes würde Mordecai deswegen widerfahren.
So therefore in verse 4 it says,
So deswegen in Vers 4 sagt es jetzt.
And the king said, Who is in the court? Now Haman was come into the outward court of the king's house to speak unto the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. So where are we now?
Wo befinden wir uns jetzt?
Yeah. Okay. So now it's the next morning, right before the banquet. He now comes to speak to the king.
So, hier ist es der nächste Morgen, kurz vor dem Bankett, und er kommt, um vor dem König zu sprechen,
To put Mordecai to death.
um Mordecai zu töten.
Verse 5.
Vers 5.
And the king's servants said unto him, Behold, Haman standeth in the court. And the king said, Let him come in. So Haman came in. And the king said unto him, What shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, To whom would the king delight to do honor more than to myself? And Haman answered the king, For the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let the royal apparel be brought, which the king uses to wear, and the horse that the king rideth upon, and the crown royal which is set upon his head. And let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man with all whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him, Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Then the king said to Haman, Make haste, and take the apparel and the horse, as thou hast said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew, that sitteth at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. Then took Haman the apparel and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and brought him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaimed before him, Thus shall it be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Right? So, we can see here, Mordecai gets delivered where he wants to put him to death. Right?
Also wir können sehen, dass Mordecai hier erlöst wird, gerade da, wo Haman ihn töten will.
I mean, when the Hebrew boys get cast into the fiery furnace,
Also wenn die Hebräer in den Feuerofen geworfen wurden,
Christ immediately comes and delivers them.
kommt
Right?
Christus sofort und befreit sie.
So, in here, what does it remind you of what happened here?
Und hier, an was erinnert uns das, was hier geschah?
The triumph entry,
Der
right?
triumphale Einzug,
Kingly apparel,
königliche
and he
Gewände,
rides on the horse, right?
und reitet auf dem Pferd
Okay, through the street.
durch die Straße.
Okay, so and he gets honored, yes?
Und er wird geehrt.
So keep your finger here.
Halte den Platz hier.
Let's go back to John 12. We looked at this yesterday.
Zurück zu Johannes 12. Das haben wir gestern angeschaut. Johannes 12.
John chapter 12. This is this chapter where Christ spoke about this hour that he was called.
Das ist diese Kapitel, wo Christus darüber sprach, dass für gerade diese Stunde ist er gerufen worden.
And so let us read verse 23 and then 26.
Wir lesen die Versen 23 und dann 26.
And Jesus answered them, saying, The hour is come that the Son of Man should be glorified. Right? The Son of Man would go to the cross
Der Menschensohn zum Kreuz gehen wird,
and lays down his life.
sein Leben niederlegt.
So let's just continue verse 24.
Lesen wir weiter, Vers
It
24.
says, Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. He that loveth his life shall lose it, and he that hateth his life in this world shall keep it unto life eternal. If any man serve me, let him follow me. And where I am, there shall also my servant be. If any man serve me, him will my father honor. Okay, so Mordecai, he got now honored. Okay,
Mordecai würde geehrt,
because he was willing to basically go into death for Christ.
weil er bereit war, für Christus zu sterben.
Okay, so let us go back to Esther,
Gehen wir zurück zu Esther,
chapter 6.
Kapitel 6.
In verse 12 to 14.
Die Verse 12 bis 14.
It says, And Mordecai came again to the king's gate, but Haman hasted to his house mourning and having his head covered. Okay, so we saw Haman here was happy when he came from the first banquet,
Wir
right?
haben gesehen, dass Haman glücklich war, als er von dem ersten Weinfest kam.
But now, after this happened here with Mordecai, now he was mourning. Okay,
Aber jetzt, nachdem das hier mit Mordecai geschah, jetzt trauerte er.
so yes, Haman happy, right?
Haman glücklich,
Haman mourning.
und hier Haman traurig
In
und trauernd.
So the Lord is now reversing, right?
So der Herr stellt das auf den Kopf.
Because it's always the same. First the enemies rejoice, and God's people are sighing and crying, and then He turns it around. Right?
Dasselbe zuerst, die Feinde Gottes frohlocken, während Gottes Volk seufzen und klagen, und dann wendet er das.
Okay, so and his head is covered. It says.
Es sagt hier, dass sein Kopf bedeckt ist.
Now let us continue, verse 13 to 14.
Verse 13 und 14.
It says, And Haman told Zeresh his wife and all his friends everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise man and Zeresh his wife unto him, If Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shalt surely fall before him. So he began now to fall, but they tell him already, you will surely fully fall. Right?
Er fing an zu fallen, aber sie sagen ihm, er wird gewiss gänzlich fallen.
So let us continue in verse 14.
Vers 14.
And while they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains and hasted to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared. So that would be now the second banquet here,
Das
right?
wäre jetzt hier diese zweite Banquet.
Okay. And then chapter 7,
Das Kapitel 7,
verse 1.
Vers 1.
So the king and Haman came to banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? It shall be performed even to the half of the kingdom. So again, same thing repeated, right?
Also wieder dasselbe wiederholt.
Okay, so it was offered her here
Es ist sie hier angeboten
and here, right?
und hier angeboten.
So I don't know, I mean, she therefore also, she must illustrate both. I mean, Joseph, we saw he illustrated,
Mordecai
yeah,
is illustrated.
Mordecai did also, yeah, but Joseph also, he illustrated all these different groups, right?
Also Josef stellt all diese verschiedenen Gruppen dar.
And she also, she just marks here, this group gets offered it here, and this group gets offered it here.
Sie
Right?
markiert, dass hier diese Gruppe wird hier angeboten und hier
Yeah, I mean,
diese Gruppe wird angeboten.
she's set up there at the beginning, but she sort of strayed a bit, because Mordecai brings her back on, and now she's just all one movement now.
Yes.
Also Esther wurde hier am Anfang aufgestellt, aber sie fällt ein bisschen von der Liebe Gottes ab, aber Mordecai bringt sie zurück.
Yeah, so here she didn't recognize the sign, but Mordecai tells her, no, you must come back.
Hier hat sie den Zeichen nicht erkannt, aber Mordecai sagt, du musst jetzt zurückkommen.
Okay, and then they go together forward.
Und sie gehen beide gemeinsam voran.
Okay, so let us continue in verse 3.
Dann lesen wir weiter in Vers 3.
Then Esther the queen answered and said, If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, Who is he, and where is he, that durst presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. Okay, so
Das ist Vers 6.
he's this adversary, right?
Ist dieser Widersacher.
And he's now afraid.
Und ist jetzt fürchterlich.
Okay, let's go just to Jeremiah,
Gehen wir zu Jeremia.
chapter 50, I think, or 51. Let's see.
Kapitel 50. Oder vielleicht gar 51.
Because these chapters, they speak about the punishment on Babylon, right?
Und diese Kapitel sprechen über die Bestrafung über Babylon.
Where is this verse? It says here somewhere that they all become like women and having this fear.
That's 43
43?
in chapter 3.
Ah, yes. Okay. Chapter 50, verse 43.
Kapitel 50, Vers 43.
Jeremiah 50, verse 43. I mean, we can maybe begin even with verse 41 just to get the context a little bit.
Und so dann Vers 41 an.
It says, Behold, a people shall come from the north, and a great nation, and many kings shall be raised up from the coast of the earth. They shall hold the bow and the lance. They are cruel, and will not show mercy. Their voice shall roar like the sea, and they shall ride upon horses. Every one put in array like a man to the battle, against thee, O daughter of Babylon. So here we can see now the punishment described coming on Babylon, right?
Hier können wir sehen die Bestrafung, die auf Babylon beschrieben ist.
The king of Babylon hath heard the report of them, and his hands waxed feeble. Anguish took hold of him, and pangs as a woman in travail. Okay, so actually that's not the verse I was looking for, but
Isaiah 13. It's the same thing.
yes.
Psalm 48.
I mean, I just need to look it through again. I didn't have it in my head. But there's somewhere a verse where it says they really have this fear. Okay.
Irgendwo ist ein Vers, wo diesen Furcht, die sie haben, beschrieben ist.
When I find it, I will later post it in the
Wenn
group.
ich es finde, werde ich es später posten.
But here we can see he also gets fearful, right, of
Hier
this
kann man
punishment.
sehen, dass sie auch furchterfüllt werden.
Okay, good. Now let us go back to, okay, maybe Psalms 48, right? It says fear took hold of him.
So, Psalm 48,
Let's just go there.
gehen wir dahin.
So let us begin in verse 3.
Dann fangen wir in Vers 3 an.
It says, God is known in her palaces for a refuge. For lo, the kings were assembled, they passed by together. They saw it, and so they marveled. They were troubled and hasted away. Fear took hold upon them there, in pain as a woman in travail. Thou breakest the ships of Tarshish with an east wind. Right, so what came upon them?
Was kam über sie?
Fear, right?
Furcht.
Then they hasted away.
Dann hasten sie weg. Jeremiah 51:28.
51, 28.
Jeremia 51, Vers 28.
28, you sure?
Sorry, 29.
Yeah.
30, sorry. Sorry.
Yes, okay. And let's
Vers
go
30.
to 51, verse 28 to 30.
Jeremia 51, die Verse 28 bis 30.
It says, Prepare against her the nations with the kings of the Medes, the captains thereof, and all the rulers thereof, and all the land of his dominion. And the land shall tremble and sorrow, for every purpose of the Lord shall be performed against Babylon, to make the land of Babylon a desolation without an inhabitant. The mighty men of Babylon have forborne to fight. They have remained in their holes. Their might hath failed. They became as women. They have burned their dwelling places. Their bars are broken. Yes, so here we can see this fear that comes upon them.
Hier können wir sehen, diese Furcht, die über sie kommt.
Now let's go back to Esther.
Jetzt zu Esther.
Yeah, Belshazzar was also full of fear.
So wie Belshazzar war auch voller Furcht.
So Esther, chapter 7.
Esther Kapitel 7.
So let us read verse 6 once more.
Vers 6 nochmal lesen.
And Esther said, The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king, arising from his banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden. And Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Okay, so the king arose, it says, right?
Der King stand auf, sagt es.
So keep your finger here.
Halte den Platz hier.
Let's go to Psalms, I think 76, I think.
Gehen wir zu Psalmen 76.
Psalms 76
Psalmen 76,
and 7 to 9.
die Versen 7 bis 9.
Because he was wrathful and he rose from his seat, right?
Weil ist voll des Zorns und ist aufgestanden von seinem Sitz.
It says, Thou, even thou, art to be feared, and who may stand in thy sight when once thou art angry? Thou didst cause judgment to be heard from heaven, the earth feared and was still, when God arose to judgment to save all the meek of the earth. Selah. So, he arises to judgment, right?
So, steht auf zum Gericht
And he's full of anger.
und ist voller Zorn.
And he comes now to save the meek of the earth, right?
Und kommt jetzt, den Demütigen der Erde zu retten.
Let us go to Zephaniah chapter 2.
Gehen wir zu Zephania Kapitel 2.
It's interesting, calls in the adversary.
Yes, deliver me from my adversary. Yes. Okay, Zephaniah
Zephania
chapter 2.
Kapitel 2.
Verse 1.
Und Vers 1.
It says, Gather yourselves together, yea, gather together, O nation not desired, before the decree bring forth, before the day pass as the chaff, before the fierce anger of the Lord come upon you, before the day of the Lord's anger come upon you. Seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness, it may be ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. So, who's to seek him according to verse 3?
So, gemäß Vers 3, wer soll ihn suchen?
The meek, right?
Die Demütigen.
And according to Psalms 76, when he rises to judgment, this is whom he will save, right?
Gemäß Psalm 76, wenn er aufsteht zum Gericht, ist es gerade die Demütigen, die er retten wird.
So, in this the Lord rises here to judgment.
Und es ist hier, wo der Herr zum Gericht aufsteht.
Yes. Right? Okay, and he comes now to save the meek.
Und
Okay.
er kommt, um den Demütigen zu retten.
So let's go to Esther chapter 7.
Gehen wir zurück zu Esther 7.
And we saw in verse 7 that Haman then tried to plead for his life before Esther,
Wir haben gesehen in Vers 7, dass Haman versuchte, um sein Leben vor Esther zu flehen.
because he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. Right?
Er hat gesehen, dass Böses bestimmt war gegen ihn vom König her.
And what did we read? I think it was yesterday or the day before. What evil is first determined against whom?
Und was haben wir gestern oder sogar vorgestern gelesen? Das Böse wird erst gegen wen bestimmt?
Jerusalem, right?
Gegen Jerusalem, Gottes Volk.
But now evil comes against Babylon.
Aber jetzt kommt Böses gegen Babylon.
So just keep your finger here, just to give you one proof text. Jeremiah 51 or 52.
Halte den Platz hier, um einen Beweis zu geben, gehen wir zu Jeremia 50,
No, 51 or 52.
51 oder sogar 52.
It's 51.
Das ist 51.
This is when Jeremiah writes this book, right?
Das ist, wenn Jeremia dieses Buch schreibt.
And then it was to be bound to a stone and then cast into the Euphrates River.
Es soll mit einem Stein verbunden werden und ins Euphratstrom geworfen werden.
Verse 60.
Vers 60.
It says, so Jeremiah wrote in a book all the evil that should come upon Babylon, even all these words that are written against Babylon. So what did he write in there?
So was schrieb er da drin?
The evil that comes against Babylon.
Das
Okay.
Böse, die gegen Babylon kommen soll.
Okay. And then he cast it into the sea, right?
Dann warf er es ins
Or in
Strom.
in the Euphrates.
Euphratstrom.
Okay, which is a parallel to Revelation 18, where the angel took the millstone and cast it into the sea. Right?
Das ist eine Parallele zur Offenbarung 18, wo der Engel diese Müllstein genommen hat und ins Meer geworfen hat.
Which is Pharaoh, right?
Das ist Pharao.
Because it says Pharaoh sunk as a stone in the midst of the sea.
Das heißt, Pharao ist gesunken wie ein Stein inmitten der Meer.
Okay. I'll tell you later. Let us go to Esther chapter 7.
Gehen wir jetzt zu Esther Kapitel 7.
Then verse 8 to 10.
Die Verse 8 bis 10.
It says, then the king returned out of the palace garden into the palace of the into the place of the banquet of wine. And Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. Then said the king, will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. So his face again is covered.
Und wieder sein Gesicht wird bedeckt.
And then verse 9 to 10.
Dann die Verse 9 und 10.
And Harbonah, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, behold also, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. Okay? So then Haman gets hanged.
So dann Haman wird erhängt.
And we'll see this, the moment we have this structure here, right?
Und wir werden das sehen. Im Moment haben wir diese Struktur hier.
But this story of Esther just gives so many details in these last events here, okay?
Aber die Geschichte von Esther gibt so viele Details in diese letzten Ereignissen hier.
So, therefore I conclude here that the Lord will eventually open up more details, maybe in a fractal, about what is really going on here in finer illustrations. Okay?
Deswegen glaube ich, dass der Herr vielleicht in einem kleineren Fraktal noch mehr Informationen auftun wird in größeren Details, was in diesen letzten Ereignissen hier stattfinden.
Because Haman was mourning and he was hanged. Okay, basically the same way mark, but at least according to the story, you can see there's a sequence of events, right?
Haman trauerte und wurde erhängt an derselben Wegmarke, aber zumindest die Geschichte nach kannst du sehen, dass da eine Reihenfolge der Ereignisse gibt.
So, and when Haman was hanged, what was with the king's wrath?
Und als Haman erhängt wurde, was ist mit der Zorn der König?
Pacified like
Pacified,
with Esther.
Exactly.
Es ist besänftigt worden, so wie bei
By
Vashti.
Vashti, right? When she was punished, it says the king's wrath was appeased.
Als Vashti bestraft würde, dann würde der Zorn des Königs besänftigt.
Okay, so therefore, whenever he executes judgment, then his wrath is pacified.
So, und wenn er auch immer Gericht ausführt, dann wird sein Zorn besänftigt.
Okay, so therefore, Haman hanged brings us now to here,
So, Haman erhängt worden, bringt uns hierhin am Ende.
and tomorrow we want to look at the last chapters here.
Und morgen wollen wir die letzten Kapitel denn Esthers anschauen.
And I mean, chapter 8 you can, I think, understand quite well, but chapter 9 is very deep. Yeah, I don't know if I have all the answers there. Okay.
Kapitel 8 ist sehr leicht zu verstehen, aber Kapitel 9 ist sehr tief und ich weiß noch nicht, ob ich alle Antworten dazu habe.
Okay. But we just go through it, that everybody is familiarized with these things.
Wir
Okay.
werden aber dennoch dahin durchgehen, damit alle vertraut mit diesen Dingen gemacht wird.
And then maybe the Lord will open these things up soon.
Vielleicht wird der Herr diese Sachen bald auftun.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay. So then let us close with our prayer.
Lass uns mit unserem Gebet schon abschließen.